Have you ever had someone push you so far that you had no choice but to push back harder? Well, this is one of those stories. If you enjoy these wild HOA and Karen tales, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more, and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. This story begins on a quiet stretch of land where my family ranch sat in peace for generations. My ranch wasn't just a house and some fences, it was hundreds of acres of open land, cattle grazing in the distance, and a lake right at the center. That lake had been in my family for over a century. My grandfather dug out parts of it with his own hands, and my father stocked it with fish decades ago. To us, it wasn't just a water source, it was history, tradition, and family pride. For years, the property had been calm. We minded our own business, and the local HOA stayed on the other side of the valley, where their gated community stretched across the hills. The HOA was notorious for controlling every detail of its residents' lives, from the color of their mailbox to the height of their grass. Luckily, my ranch sat outside their jurisdiction. That didn't stop her president, though. She was the kind of woman who believed the whole valley was hers to command. Her name? Karen. And if you've been around these stories before, you already know the chaos that comes when a Karen gets too much power. It started small. She would complain that my ranch wasn't aesthetically aligned with her community. She hated that my cattle sometimes grazed near the property line. She didn't like the sight of farm equipment driving down the road. And she especially despised the lake, which she called an underutilized space that could serve her HOA better than it served me. At first, I ignored her. People like her thrive on attention, and I wasn't about to waste mine. But then, one morning, I got a call from a neighbor who had seen something shocking online. Karen had listed my private ranch lake on a local real estate website as though it were community property. She claimed it was open for future development and priced it like she was ready to sell it off to some developer with deep pockets. The audacity left me speechless. That lake wasn't for sale. It wasn't hers to touch. And yet, there it was. Photos she had taken without permission, captions she wrote herself, and even offers rolling in from people who thought they were about to snatch up a prime piece of land. When I confronted her about it, she doubled down, insisting that the lake was a community asset and that she had every right to manage it on behalf of her HOA. But here's the kicker. When I told her I would be calling my lawyer, she decided to call the cops on me instead. Yes, you heard that right. Karen called the police claiming I was harassing her for trying to improve community resources. When the officers arrived at my ranch, I calmly showed them the deed, the maps, and every scrap of proof that the lake was mine and had always been mine. The cops saw the truth immediately. They couldn't do anything to me, but they also couldn't stop her from stirring up trouble. They gave me the usual advice: document everything, stay calm, and let the courts handle it if she escalated. But that's when I decided I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going to turn the tables. You see, while she had spent years nitpicking over other people's land, her own property sat at the edge of the HOA's reach. And as it happened, her lot was up for renewal on a lease arrangement that tied into some older agreements about land rights in the valley. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I did. With a few well-timed calls and the right legal maneuvering, I discovered I could purchase her lot outright when it came available. And that's exactly what I did. I signed the papers, bought her land, and made it official. Overnight, Karen's precious property no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. The best part? Her lot wasn't just a house. It was also the only road that connected her HOA community to the outside world. By owning that strip of land, I now had the power to decide who came and went. Karen had called the cops on me for owning my own lake, and now I legally owned the ground beneath her entire neighborhood's access road. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. The HOA panicked when they realized what happened. Karen was furious, storming into town meetings, demanding that the county stop me. But the county clerk had already stamped the deal. It was done, legal, and airtight. That's when I decided to show her just how serious I was. I put up a massive gate across the access road, right on the land I now owned. A heavy-duty steel structure with a lock so big you'd need a torch to cut through it. I hung a bold sign across the front: private property, no access without permission. The HOA members couldn't believe it. They were trapped in their own community, forced to face the reality that their president had poked the wrong bear. Karen had tried to sell my lake, called the cops on me, and played power games for years. Now she was watching as I closed off the only route to her neighborhood. Of course, this was only the beginning. By cutting off their road, I didn't just inconvenience them. I had triggered a full-blown war between me and the HOA, one that Karen wasn't prepared to fight. And the best part? I was just getting started.
The gate had changed everything. Overnight, the once proud HOA community transformed into a neighborhood under siege. For the first time in years, the residents felt powerless, and they knew exactly who to blame. Their president, Karen. She tried to hold emergency HOA meetings to calm them down, but those meetings quickly turned into shouting matches. Families who had once voted her into power were now demanding answers. Why had she meddled with my ranch? Why had she called the cops? And worst of all, how had she allowed her own property, and by extension their road, to end up in my hands? Karen, of course, deflected blame. She insisted that I was sabotaging the community and acting illegally. She spun stories about me being greedy, dangerous, and unfit to own land near a respectable neighborhood. But as much as she ranted, the paperwork didn't lie. The title was mine, the land was mine, and the gate was mine. The residents realized that no matter how much Karen barked, she couldn't undo what had already been done. Still, Karen wasn't one to give up easily. She took the fight to court. She filed injunctions, petitions, and complaints, trying to argue that my gate violated public access laws. She even accused me of intentionally land grabbing to harm her community. But every time, the judge looked at the documents, saw the legal ownership, and tossed her claims aside. The courtroom became her personal stage, yet every performance ended in failure. That's when the HOA decided to get more aggressive. They pooled their resources and hired a team of lawyers determined to outspend me into submission. Their new argument was that the roads served as essential infrastructure, and therefore I was obligated to provide access. They called it a community necessity, but the law called it what it was: entitlement. Their lawyers tried to bully me with technicalities, but I came prepared. I hired my own legal team, specialists who knew property law inside and out. We dug through every old deed, every clause in the contract, and every loophole in their arguments. Piece by piece, we dismantled their case until they had nothing left but outrage. But even with the legal system on my side, the pressure was building. Karen wasn't just fighting in court. She was rallying her HOA members to harass me directly. I'd wake up to find flyers stuffed in my mailbox, accusing me of being a community menace. HOA members trespassed at night, banging on the gate and shouting. Once, someone even spray-painted my fence, leaving threats about taking back what's theirs. Karen fueled the fire with every word she spread, but she underestimated something important. I wasn't just defending myself, I was documenting everything. Every flyer, every spray-painted thread, every incident of trespassing was photographed, cataloged, and handed straight to the sheriff's office. The HOA thought they were intimidating me, but in reality, they were building a case against themselves. The sheriff eventually showed up at Karen's door with a warning: the harassment had to stop or the HOA would face criminal charges. But instead of backing down, Karen doubled down. She started talking about community resistance and standing strong against tyranny. She framed herself as a victim even though she was the one who had lit the fire in the first place. While she stirred chaos, I quietly made moves of my own. I didn't just buy her lot to block their access, I started buying up parcels of land around their community too. Little strips of unused property, overlooked by most, but critical for controlling access to utilities, easements, and secondary roads. Slowly but surely, I tightened the circle. By the time Karen realized what I was doing, it was too late. I owned every legal entry point into their community. Their once secure neighborhood was now boxed in by my land, and they couldn't make a single move without my permission. And then came the breaking point. One evening, a storm rolled in. Heavy rain flooded the valley, washing debris down from the hills. The HOA's storm drains overflowed, and their community's access road, the one behind my locked 8, was the only route emergency vehicles could take to reach them. Fire trucks and ambulances pulled up to my property, but the gate stood firm. I unlocked it for the emergency crews, of course. I wasn't heartless. But the sight of their flashing lights passing through my property sent a message louder than any words. I controlled their future, whether they liked it or not. The HOA members finally snapped. Dozens of them demanded Karen step down. They wanted peace, not endless battles with a neighbor who clearly held all the cards. But Karen refused to resign. She screamed about betrayal, about how they were cowards for turning against her. In her mind, she wasn't the problem. I was. But the tide had turned. The residents no longer feared me. They feared what Karen's stubbornness was costing them. That's when whispers started spreading that some of the residents wanted to strike a deal with me directly, cutting Karen out entirely. They wanted to bypass the HOA, talk man to man, and find a solution that wouldn't leave them at the mercy of her ego. And that's where things were left. Karen fighting harder than ever to maintain control, the residents fracturing under the weight of her failures, and me holding every legal advantage I needed to end this on my terms. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just going to stop at owning their road. I had something bigger in mind, something that would end Karen's reign once and for all.
The cracks in Karen's empire had widened into fractures, and those fractures were about to split the HOA apart for good. By the time Chapter 2 left off, I had boxed in their entire neighborhood with my land purchases. Their access was limited, their members were restless, and Karen's leadership was hanging by a thread. But Karen, stubborn as always, wasn't about to go quietly. She launched her last desperate attack. One morning, I woke up to find legal documents nailed to my fence. Karen had filed yet another lawsuit. This time, she accused me of intentionally landlocking the community and demanded I sell her lot back at a reasonable price. She even had the audacity to claim that I was committing extortion by charging access fees. The problem for her was simple. None of it was true. Every purchase I made was legal, every title transfer filed with the county. The fees I charged were already less than what her own HOA collected in dues. She had no case, but she had one last weapon: drama. She started staging protests at my gate, lining up HOA members with signs and banners, chanting about freedom and community rights. The protests backfired. Local media caught wind of the situation and showed up with cameras. Instead of seeing a noble fight for justice, the reporters saw a red-faced HOA president screaming at a gate while her neighbors stood miserably behind her. When the cameras panned to me, I stood calmly by the gate, paperwork in hand, explaining how I had legally acquired the land. The contrast was undeniable. And then came the turning point. While digging through HOA financials during discovery for her lawsuit, my lawyers uncovered something shocking. Karen had been embezzling funds from her own HOA for years. Tens of thousands of dollars in administrative costs had been funneled into her personal accounts. Vacations, luxury handbags, and even payments on her own SUV, all disguised as HOA expenses. When this evidence surfaced in court, the room went silent. The judge's expression hardened as he flipped through the documents. The members of the HOA, many of who had defended Karen for months, suddenly realized they weren't just victims of her arrogance, they were victims of her theft. The lawsuit didn't just collapse, it turned into a criminal investigation. The county sheriff, already frustrated with the harassment and trespassing reports, launched a full probe into the HOA's finances. Within weeks, Karen was indicted on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and harassment. The day the deputies came to arrest her was the day everything changed. Neighbors gathered at the gate, watching as the woman who had once terrorized them with fines and threats was led away in handcuffs.
Some of them cheered. Others just shook their heads in disbelief, but all of them knew her reign was over. With Karen gone, the HOA structure crumbled. Meetings fell apart, fines went unpaid, and members stopped showing up. The organization that once claimed dominion over everyone's lives dissolved into chaos. Eventually, the county moved to dissolve the HOA altogether, citing corruption and mismanagement. As for me, I made sure the lessons stuck. I kept the gate in place, standing tall as a reminder of what happens when greed and arrogance try to steamroll over property rights. But I didn't cut the neighbors off. I worked with the reasonable families, giving them fair terms for access, and even helping them repair the damage Karen had caused. Over time, what had once been a battleground became a cautious partnership. But the memory of Karen never really faded. Her downfall became a cautionary tale in the area. People still talked about the president who tried to sell off a lake that wasn't hers, the lawsuit she filed, and the SUV she parked in defiance. And they always remembered the moment it all came crashing down, when her arrogance met its match and her empire collapsed under the weight of her lies. For me, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting what was mine, standing firm against bullying, and reminding everyone that arrogance always has a price. Karen paid hers in public humiliation, criminal charges, and the loss of everything she thought she controlled. And as I watched the community slowly rebuild itself, I knew one thing for certain. The HOA would never again try to test me. Not after what they saw happen to Karen. So the story of a blocked driveway, a for sale sign on a lake, and a woman drunk on power ended exactly as it should have, with the truth revealed, justice served, and a gate standing strong at the edge of my ranch. A gate no HOA could ever touch again.